Welcome to Let's Get Writing Season 4. I'm your host, Kathryn Taylor. Well, Let's Get Writing is all about the writing process from creation to publication. And here is where I hope you can find inspiration, ideas, and most of all, meet the people behind the stories. We bring life to books and so much more. Let's Get Writing is available each week live on my Facebook page at Kathryn Taylor Media, and all shows are permanently hosted on my YouTube channel at Kathryn Taylor TV, and also available as podcasts on Podbean and other podcast platforms. And if you like your content on the go, that's a great way to get it. I also love your feedback, so please share your ideas and comments, and also support me if you'd like to do that. Subscribe and never miss another episode. Whoops, I'm losing my headphone here. Now, my guest today is returning to the show for a second time by the popular demand of me. He is a Governor General Award winner and is the best-selling author of 22 books, fiction, literary, nonfiction, poetry, and plays. And so I'm told, and so I have experienced, he also has a great sense of humor. And we're going to bring him up now. Hi, Kevin Major, if they haven't guessed who it is.
Great to be back again. Great to be here.
Oh, it is great to have you back. And I remembered from our last conversation that I said it wasn't nearly long enough. So that was why I'm bringing you back by popular demand of me. I wanted to continue talking to you about your body of work and all the wonderful things that you've done over the years, but most especially what I hold in my hand today, book 3 of your crime series, Kevin. And I think we're all enjoying this. But before I do that, I always like to embarrass my guests. Let me do this first.
Okay.
Let's show a very young. This is before 22 books, and in the middle is after 22 books. Kevin, this picture was on your webpage, which is kevinmajor.ca, folks. And Kevin, as a young boy, I have to ask, were you a reader or did you have a vivid imagination? Where did it start?
I was definitely a reader. Yeah. I mean, I love to read. I can't say I was a writer, at least if you were to judge by the little bits of material you'll find that I wrote at that age in for example, a school yearbook. I would be somewhat embarrassed to see that in public. But I did have an interest in writing as I got a little bit older, especially in high school. And I can remember a teacher saying to me at one point in grade 11, Kevin, I think someday you're going to write a book. Mm-hmm. And hopefully he didn't say that to many people. And it kind of stuck with me. And I guess it was some confidence booster as well. I went to university. I was going to become a doctor, actually. I graduated from a pre-med program. I was accepted for medical school. And I kind of drew back and thought, is this really what I want to do with my life? And nagging in the back of my mind was the idea, maybe I would like to write, at least give it a try and see if it would work.
Mm-hmm. And we're very glad that you did, for sure. And Kevin, you know, those words and where you mentioned a teacher had said to you one time, I think maybe you'll write a book. And you were a teacher for a period of time.
Yes, I was.
Well.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's so interesting how things can influence us or impact us, our confidence growing up, and those things that we think about after the fact.
Yeah, that's kind of interesting. I mean, now and then, it hasn't happened terribly often, but now and then I have contact with a student that I taught who will say, you said this to me at some point in my life, and I obviously don't remember it, but he's, that was a pretty big influence. So as a teacher, especially, I think, sometimes you say things that hopefully make an impact, but you never realize, in a sense, how much an impact it may possibly make.
as a teacher and as a parent too, Kevin.
Yeah.
And that brings me to Nick and to Sebastian Synard in the star or the protagonist of your new series of crime novels. And I think Sebastian looks at that and thinks about that sometimes, how he's going to guide Nick and have different conversations with him, which a beautiful relationship there that you're developing.
Yeah.
Let's talk about crime fiction a bit, Kevin, because that, I mean, so many people have read you for your historical fiction and so many things, and all of a sudden, a right-hand turn into crime. Is anyone mad at you?
I don't know. I mean, they have enough other things to choose from in my career as a writer to satisfy them. Yeah, it was not something that I actually really intended to do. But my wife said to me at one point, Kevin, you have a really good sense of humor. Your books recently have been pretty heavy and, heavily weighted historically and a lot of research and background. Maybe you should lighten up a bit. And I thought, well, I'll write a murder mystery with a sense of humor. Murder mysteries are not often light fiction, but in this case, given the character of Sebastian and his relationships that develop in the course of the novel, I think there are times, I think you felt that you could laugh at the situation and laugh at his humor and enjoy it. And at other times in the book, it gets pretty serious. It gets violent at times. So it's trying to make that blend work together that I think is a challenge for me, at least.
Yeah, and I think it's to make a character that we like. I think Sebastian's very likable because he's flawed. I mean, he certainly doesn't run the show perfectly. Yeah. Relationships or his blossoming private eye business and all those things. And I just think he's a character that we love to love. Yeah. And and he's real. So even though you have the other elements there, I enjoy spending time with him, and especially those offhanded comments he makes at the end. Like he's, you know what he's thinking. He's saying one thing, and then he's thinking something. Kevin, is that what you're like at all?
Well, my wife would say there's some parallel between Sebastian and myself. That was one of the attractions of writing this for me, is that I saw the character developing through the course of the book. His experiences from book one are a little bit different in book two and in book three. His son is getting older, so there's different issues developing there. His own relationships with his female interests in the story are changing. So he's developing in, I think, an interesting way. And for me, that is as interesting to write about as is the crime itself. I mean, you had to balance the two, obviously. But I think it's in lots of ways, the books are character-driven. They're plot-driven, as most crime fiction would have to be, but also there's the characters play a definite important role in the story.
They definitely do. And Kevin, one of the things I wanted to ask you, in writing crime fiction, I mean, you drop seeds or whatever they call breadcrumbs along the way, but how hard is it to have an ending that's going to surprise people? Or is that important to you as you're writing? Or I often think it would be challenging to move the story along without giving away too much. How is it from the point of view of writing them? How do you find that?
Well, that's definitely the case. I mean, you want, as it moves towards a climax, you want it to be surprising in some way, at least some turn that it takes. And I think you found that in the three books so far. And interesting you should say that at this point in time, because I'm in the midst of writing the first draft of the fourth in this series. And I'm at a crucial point where, everybody thinks this is what's going to happen at this point of time, but there is something going to, and I'm not actually quite sure what yet, that's going to make a little bit of a 90-degree turn in another direction that I at this point hadn't counted on, and hopefully the reader doesn't as well. And so, yeah, that's an important part of writing these type books, I think. And you mentioned about getting the clues to add up. That's important because you want to drop some hints, as you said, in the course of the book, and then for the reader to say, right, yeah, he did say that back there. And this is where an editor comes in. It's tremendously important. I think especially in these books. Her role has been to obviously read through and then pick up where maybe things don't quite add up. You said this here at page 60, and suddenly you're not really taking that into account when something happens on, page 130. So it's her role. I have a great editor in Marnie Parsons, and she's meticulous, which is what I really want in an editor, to read it and reread it and pick up even the very minor points that I think some editors would probably let slip by. That's important to me, because you want everything to work through in a logical and correct manner.
And when you mentioned, I didn't know who your editor was, but when you mentioned Marnie Parsons, and I'm assuming it's the Marnie Parsons I've interviewed, she's, I can absolutely agree with your assessment of her. I think she would pick things up and would challenge that, because that was another one of my questions, Kevin, like, who gets the job of editing your books? And at the point, I said 22 books. Do you still feel you need an editor all the time?
I definitely do feel I need an editor. And, I sometimes read books by very well-known authors who I think, this could have done with more editing. And maybe some authors have inflated egos by the time if they get to be bestsellers, and they say, well, I know what I'm doing. I did it right, so I don't need anybody to tell me. But an editor, I think is key to success of a book. Yeah.
So we never outgrow the need for a good editor.
I don't think so. No.
Yeah, and that makes sense. Another set of eyes on a book, they're always going to pick up something you won't see.
Yeah, especially at the point at which it reaches the editor. I mean, I've done through the first draft of the book. I've gone over, I've reread it, polished it up to a point that I think this is the best I can do at this point in time. Then the editor will read it and make comments, sometimes general comments, but then, as it moves on, more specific comments. And as the author, you kind of, we are so attuned to it, so much in the moment, that you lose that perspective. Ideally, if I had the time to deal with, would be to take the manuscript after I finished polishing up and set it aside for 6 months and then come to it fresh. I don't have that luxury if I'm going to bring out one crime novel a year for the next few years. So
we're not going to give you that luxury. Well, coming to this point, we're talking about you writing this series and writing books every year. And right now I'm just going to show in the stream. This is the first one. Okay, we had one for the Rock, and then I've noticed in your titles, I think it's the direction I go in, 2 for the Tablelands, and here we are now at 3 for Trinity. And how high can you count, Kevin? Is my question.
Well, I'm committed to count to 5 at this point. I have a contract with Breakwater to produce 5 titles, 3 of which have been published, so there's 2 more to go in that particular contract. And we're going to see after that point where I am. Ideally, I like to continue, at least, I've already know what 4 is going to be, and I actually know what 5 is going to be, even though I haven't started. And I can kind of look down the road to the other title. People are not familiar with the books should know that Sebastian is also a tour guide. Besides being a private eye, he blends the two. And I did that specifically because I wanted to be able to take the settings of the book to different parts of Newfoundland and Labrador. So the first one was set pretty well all in St. John's. Then we moved to the West Coast for much of Two for the Tablelands. Here we're on the Buena Vista Peninsula. Where are we going next? I'm not going to tell you, but it's 4 for something.
Four for fortune.
Could be. So yeah. So and then that, to me, that also helps make it fresh. He's changing as a person. There's a new environment. He's in a new relationship. There's new scenery physically in the makeup of the book, and we're discovering also a different part of this wonderful province that we live in.
Which I think you're very passionate about. Newfoundland is so prominent. Newfoundland and Labrador, I should say, not to forget Labrador, is so prominent. And you seem to have a great love for the province and wanting to share it in many ways. It's always there. It's like a character in all of your books.
Yeah, it's very, I don't think I can't really think of one book that didn't have Newfoundland in it to some extent. I mean, some much more than others, but it's always there in my mind. And I often said to people, I feel so fortunate having been born where I was and grew up where I did, because this province offers so much in the way of possibilities for backgrounds for books and, settings and so on.
Absolutely. Kevin, when you mentioned the process of keeping a series going and some of the tools you have, of change of location and his profession, but all those murders happening or things that are happening in Newfoundland. And when we chatted earlier, I think you said someone you knew or might be a friend or a former friend who said to you, that's unbelievable. You can't keep setting these murders in Newfoundland. What do you say to that?
Well, what I say is this is a work of fiction. And, as a reader, you kind of put that out of your mind and hopefully enjoy the story. The person was right. It's maybe somewhat illogical that he's every year on a tour, he's going to somehow encounter a crime that needs to be solved and a murder that needs to be solved. But that's what the story is all about, and the reader suspends his disbelief in that and goes with the story, enjoys the character, and that's all I can say. I mean, you add up the number of murders in Newfoundland in any given year, you're not going to find as many as Sebastian is going to deal with over time.
He lives in he picked the right sideline. He sure did. If he was going to have a side hustle. PI was a very good choice. Yeah. Kevin, we were talking about the books, and I do want to ask you a bit about a few of the how you keep it all straight. But before we do that, I'd like to give you a chance to read a little from the book, so folks can get a sense of your characters.
Okay, sure.
If you would like to take it away for a little while here.
Okay, let me just give a little bit of background. It won't take very long. So it's set in Trinity for the most part, and Trinity is the home of Rising Tide Theatre. And Rising Tide and its artistic director Donna Butt is someone I've had a professional relationship with for a long time. She's produced some of my scripts as plays and so on. So the murder actually will take place on stage as part of a performance, and this is how it unfolds at the beginning. Wrong way. In he comes from stage left, looking every bit the part in a check shirt, an overly wide tie, a mismatch for the plaid jacket, and baggy pants. He's unsteady on his feet, looking a bit like he hit the bottle one too many times, very definitely gone to seed, edging towards the farcical. His dialect is slurred and not decipherable by the audience, even though we're mostly Newfoundlanders. He's taken a seat on stage in a courtroom behind a railing and is just about to hear the charge of theft. He squares himself up, prepared to lay out a defense. Suddenly, without warning, he collapses. He hangs illogically over the railing. The audience roars. His only movement is the heave of his chest generated by a prolonged round of coughing. The audience laughter comes to an abrupt end. The infectious perils of open coughing have been so ingrained in us over the past several months that everyone instantly checks that their face masks are secure. The audience bubble seated closest to the stage stiffened, prepared to retreat. The most theater savvy among us are wondering if what happened on stage is not all part of the skit. The character is unceremoniously dragged off stage, causing a few people to chuckle tentatively. But then the storyline falls apart. The remainder of the cast stands mute and miserable, clueless what to do next. And tearing her way from back of the theater, where she's been watching the performance, is Donna Butt, hair flying, sputtering behind her face shield so intensely that it fogs her view of the audience. She abruptly snatches it away. Sorry about that, folks. No need to worry. He's been tested. They've all been tested. It's his asthma, probably mislaid his puffer. You know what the young crowd are like these days. Sit down, folks. Enjoy the rest of the show. Meanwhile, I'll make sure he's okay. Which is meant as much for the cast left on stage as it is for the audience. The space is cleared at the skit's propped, and in record time, Donna is hardly out of sight before the fiddle is back in action, displacing the pall that has pervaded the theater. The show goes on. These things happen. I glance at Ailsa. She's not so sure. He leans close to me and close to my ear. I think I better check this out. She abandons her seat, the tour guide behind her, both of us trying to look inconspicuous as we take the same aisle, the same side entrance, to backstage that Donna has taken. We hear her before we reach the cluster of people around the fellow, who by this time has finally stopped coughing. Good God, where's his pupper? Lyle, if you're drunk, I'll have your head. We watch as one of the stagehands digs the inhaler out of Lyle's pants pocket. Ailsa steps forward. I'm a trained first responder, she says. Donna snaps a look at her, but before there's time to ask the question, Ailsa flashes her identification cards. Inspector Bulmore, RCMP. So Inspector Bulmore happens to be on the tour with Sebastian, and she's an RCMP officer, and also somewhat of a romantic interest for Sebastian.
Yes, well, this is it. You hit all the hot points in this story of Sebastian. We do have the romance, we have the father relationship, we have the murder, we have the scenery in Newfoundland. I think you have the perfect mix to appeal to a broad range of people. And how does Donna Butt feel about being a star in your book? It's not that often you see that technique. Makes sense because that's the tour guide for you, I think. Yeah. But how did that all come about?
Well, as I said, I've known Donna for quite a while, and so I had this idea for the book. I mean, I could set it in Trinity and give a fictitious name to a theater company and a fictitious, theater director. But everybody would think, oh, that must be Rising Tide and Donna Butt. So I said I got in touch with her and chatted with her, and I'd gone out to Trinity last summer, and said, I'd like to. I'm thinking about writing a murder mystery. How would you feel if you were a central character in the story? And she thought about it for a while, and I said, well, I'll send you a few pages when I get going on the book, and read and see what you think, and let me know. And I didn't hear from her for a long time, and finally we made contact again. She said, oh, sure, go ahead. I said to her, you're always a risk taker, Donna, so this only goes to prove the point.
Well, and what a great promotion for in some ways for their theater,
Yeah.
theater within the book. But yeah, I did wonder about that, and it's very interesting that it's there. And I do feel that I think I would have made the same decision in your shoes. How can you write fictitiously about that? We're all going to make that association.
Yeah.
So why not do it?
And she's, and Donna's if you know Donna, she's a character in herself, and a lovable person in so many ways. But she has an edge to her. After all, she's a theater director, and you got to get the performance on stage. And when she gets to the serious points, she's pretty cut and dried about what needs to be done with a performance. So, So I'm waiting to hear from her. See
Oh, maybe we'll have the two of you on to discuss it.
That would be fun.
That would be fun. Kevin, in writing a series, I know you talked about the things that anchor you and give you lots of leverage, such as he's a tour guide, Sebastian, and so on. But how do you keep it all straight? Because do you keep character profiles, or because if you write one book and it's done, you kind of can put that aside. But when you're continuously bringing it forward, how do you handle that?
Before I publish anyone in the series, I read the other two again, and made some notes about them, because, if he's a certain age in one book and advances a year, then we have to be careful that we're right on what age he is, or how, when is Nick's birthday? So what age would he be in May versus some things that happened in September? So that's important. And, even kind of the spelling of certain names. I know when I did two for the Tablelands in the draft that I sent to Marnie, I had misspelled the character Frederick, because I had spelled it with just IC. And I looked back at One for the Rock, and I discovered that I had spelled it with a K on the end. So, don't want to make that mistake. So you just, I guess I do a character profile in my mind, and with some specific things that I would need to bear in mind as I'm working through. But he's also a character that's evolving and changing, so I want him not to be necessarily consistent, because he's in the new book is in a different relationship and is bringing out a different aspect of him.
And all those things. Well, Kevin, once again, our time together has come to an end ever so quickly. And who knows, there may be a part 3 to this as we continue down the road. I just want to thank you so much for sharing your expertise and taking the time to visit me again on Let's Get Writing.
Thanks very much, Kathryn. I've thoroughly enjoyed it.
Me as well. And don't go away. We're going to do an Instagram, Kevin.
Okay.
We'll go live there. Thank you, folks, for joining us on Let's Get Writing. Don't forget to subscribe and catch all your favorite authors right here. Thank you. Bye now.